Hello everyone and welcome back to Panik Peak. Let me know where you are listening from in the world by leaving a comment, and if you like the episode, please like and subscribe. Now, let's get cozy, and let's begin. It was supposed to be a peaceful night under the stars. I had been driving for hours, craving nothing more than solitude and the calm of nature. A solo trip to escape the chaos of daily life. I found a quiet forest road, nestled far from civilization, and decided this would be the perfect spot to park my RV for the night. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting soft shadows on the ground. The air was crisp, the kind of peaceful stillness that felt like a sigh of relief after a long journey. After parking, I set up my small space, made a simple dinner, and settled into the warmth of my RV. The world outside seemed miles away. I curled up in bed, pulled the blanket up, and turned off the lights. It was exactly what I needed, just a few hours of sleep, a chance to reset. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly have known, was that I would never forget this night. That sleep would be interrupted by something far more terrifying than I could have imagined. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The kind of silence that's too perfect, too still, like the world is holding its breath. I awoke with a start, my body tensed, as if something had brushed against me, though nothing was there. My eyes shot open, and for a moment, I thought I was just imagining things, maybe still groggy from my nap. But then I heard it again. A low, heavy rumble. A sound that was far too deliberate to be the wind. I sat up quickly, my heartbeat starting to pound in my chest. It was too close to ignore. Something was moving outside. It was far too heavy to be an animal. This was no deer or bear stumbling through the underbrush. The sound was more mechanical. Tire tracks. The slow roll of something large and heavy moving across the ground. I held my breath, straining to listen, but the sound stopped. A dead silence followed. My eyes darted to the window. I couldn't see anything through the darkness, only shadows, but the rumble had been so real, I couldn't convince myself it was my imagination. For a moment, I thought about getting out of bed, but I stayed frozen. I told myself it was probably just some passing truck, maybe a delivery vehicle or some other traveler who had found the road. But the quietness of the area seemed to suggest otherwise. I would have seen headlights or heard the engine long before it got this close. I was parked miles from any main road, no one would just be passing by. I lay back down, trying to tell myself it was nothing. Trying to ignore the nagging sense of unease creeping up my spine. But I couldn't. My heart beat faster with each passing second. The stillness outside felt wrong, too still. Then, just as I was starting to convince myself I was overreacting, I heard the sound again. This time, it was louder. Closer. The tires. The unmistakable deep groan of rubber against dirt. The rumbling was so close now, I could almost feel it vibrating through the RV's walls. My stomach churned. I had to look. I couldn't not look. I got up slowly, my legs unsteady as if the ground beneath me were shifting. My hands trembled as I pulled the curtain back, just a sliver, to peek outside. My breath caught in my throat. There, in the dirt, were fresh tire tracks. The marks were deep, wide, far too wide to be the tracks of a car. They circled the RV. A perfect loop, as if someone had driven in tight circles around me while I slept, careful to avoid disturbing the surrounding trees. The earth was still dark in places where the tires had recently pressed into it, the rubber scent lingering faintly in the air. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead as I took in the sight. I hadn't heard a vehicle arrive. I hadn't seen any headlights. No engine noise had disturbed the silence until just now. No one had been near me when I parked. I was certain of it. So where had these tire tracks come from? My mind raced. Could it have been some other traveler who had pulled up after I had fallen asleep? But why would they make a perfect circle around my RV, and why so quietly? No one would have been able to drive in without me noticing. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering in my chest. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some prank. Maybe someone had seen me park and decided to mess with me. But the tracks didn't look like a prank. They were deliberate, methodical. The sound came again. The rumble of tires, now unmistakable, circling closer. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I rushed to the door, my hand shaking as I grabbed the handle, but before I could turn it, I froze. A shadow passed outside. It was fleeting, but I saw it, just a glimpse of something dark, something moving slowly past my window, out of the corner of my eye. It wasn't the shape of a person, not exactly. But it was something. Something tall, thin, like it was crouching low to the ground. A figure. No. More like a presence. I pressed my back against the door, the weight of it making the wood creak under my fingers. I should have called someone. Should have left. But I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the floor. The shadows outside had a way of pulling me in, making me feel smaller, as if they were closing in on me, pushing me deeper into my own panic. Then, the engine roared to life. The sound of it was like a monster waking up, a growl that seemed to rattle the RV's foundation. The low hum of tires on dirt grew louder, coming from every direction. The marks in the ground, they were getting closer, deepening with each pass. I dared another glance outside, just a quick one. But there was nothing, nothing except the tire tracks. But I could feel it. I could feel the movement outside, the weight of something pacing just beyond the reach of my sight. Panic gripped me, and I ran to the back window, pressing my face against the glass. Nothing. No headlights. No figures. Just the tracks, now closer, now so close, they were almost touching the RV itself. Whoever, or whatever, was out there was moving in tight circles around me, never stopping, never leaving. I grabbed my phone, hands slick with sweat, but there was no signal. Of course, there wouldn't be. I was miles from the nearest town, in the middle of nowhere. A loud bang. The sound echoed through the RV like something hitting the side, and my body jerked in response. My breath came out in short, panicked bursts. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady myself, trying to figure out what to do. But it was too late for that. The tire tracks, no, the thing making those tracks, was already here. I could hear the engine again, roaring louder now, but it sounded distant. As if the vehicle was pulling back, circling once more. I backed away from the window, slowly, silently, trying to make no sound. And then, in the distance, I saw it. A shadow on the road. It wasn't a car. It was something moving too quickly. Too unnaturally. The shape was too elongated, the edges too sharp, as if the thing wasn't human. It wasn't even close to being human. But it was out there, watching. Waiting. It knew I was trapped. The rumbling grew louder, and then it stopped. The silence returned, even more unnerving than before. I couldn't stay here. I had to leave, but how? The tracks surrounded me. The creature, or whatever it was, had left its mark. And I realized then, in the pit of my stomach, that it wasn't done with me. It wasn't leaving. And neither was I. The silence stretched on, suffocating, I stayed pressed against the wall, listening for any sound, any movement. The shadow outside was gone, but the sense of dread lingered like a heavy fog. The tire tracks, those deep, deliberate grooves, remained imprinted in my mind, circling the RV like a predator stalking its prey. I didn't know how long I'd been there, minutes. Hours. Time seemed to fold in on itself, bending to the oppressive stillness. My hands were shaking, my thoughts a chaotic jumble. I couldn't leave. Not yet. I couldn't risk stepping outside. Whatever it was out there, it was waiting for me. Suddenly, I heard it again, the low hum of an engine, muffled by the trees. But this time, it wasn't a distant rumble. It was close. Too close. The tires were moving again, circling the RV once more, as if daring me to make a sound. The engine revved. It was louder than before, more urgent, more aggressive. I pressed my face to the window, heart in my throat, but there was nothing. No headlights, no figure. Just the tracks, the same tracks, weaving through the earth outside, slowly but surely getting closer. The vehicle, or whatever it was right on the edge now, waiting for the right moment to strike. I grabbed my keys, my fingers numb. It was now or never. I couldn't stay in here any longer. I had to leave. But the road outside was no longer my escape. The tracks blocked me in, wrapping around like a noose. There was no way out. I turned the ignition. The RV sputtered to life, its engine coughing in protest. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white, as I backed out as carefully as I could, inch by agonizing inch. The tires crunched over the soft earth, and for a moment, it felt like I might make it. But then, there it was again. The rumble. Closer this time. The engine was right outside the RV, and in that instant, I knew. I knew it wasn't just a person. It wasn't even a thing that could be reasoned with. Whatever had been circling me had been waiting for me to make a mistake, to get too comfortable. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor, heart pounding, praying the RV would move fast enough to escape. The tires screeched against the dirt, but as I drove, I could feel it behind me, something. A presence. The engine's growl. It was still there, still following, still circling, just out of sight. I didn't dare look back. The road stretched on, and the tire tracks began to fade, finally lost in the distance. I kept driving, through the night, never slowing, never turning back. I don't know how far I went before I finally found a place with cell service, but when I did, I called the police. I told them everything. About the tire tracks. The sounds. The shadow. But they didn't believe me. They said it was probably just an animal or some pranksters. Nothing more. They'd send someone to check it out, but when they arrived, they found nothing. No tire tracks. No signs of anyone. Just the forest, as quiet and still as it had been before I parked. I didn't go back to that road. I couldn't. Every time I close my eyes, I hear that rumble, that engine, that low growl creeping closer. The tracks still haunt me, the image of them forever etched in my mind. And sometimes, when I'm alone, when it's too quiet, I swear I hear it again. The sound of tires. The feeling of something circling, waiting. Watching. It hasn't forgotten me. And I know it's still out there. It was supposed to be the perfect getaway. The kind of retreat where you leave the world behind, just you and the person you love, immersed in nature's solitude. We had heard rumors about the lost trail, the kind of trail that no one else seemed to care about, buried deep in the forest, untouched by hikers and tourists. It sounded like exactly what we needed. A chance to disconnect, to get away from the noise of life. Eric and I packed up the RV and made the long drive into the mountains, eager for the kind of peace you can only find in the quietest corners of the world. We pulled off the main road, following a narrow, winding path through the trees. When we arrived, the forest around us felt ancient, silent, except for the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant chirp of birds. We set up camp, the RV nestled under a canopy of towering trees. The air was fresh, crisp with the scent of pine, and the only sounds were the ones we made ourselves. But something lingered beneath the surface, a whisper of unease that I couldn't quite shake. As the night fell and the sky darkened, the forest seemed to close in around us. I felt like I was being watched. It wasn't until later, when the scratching began, that I understood. We had chosen the wrong trail. We had come too far into a place we didn't belong. The first night, the noises started faintly, barely noticeable at first, like a branch brushing against the side of the RV. But as the hours wore on, the scratching grew louder, more deliberate. At first, I told myself it was just a raccoon or some other curious creature, wildlife in the woods, right? But when the scratching moved to a steady rhythm, tapping on the windows like a hand, I wasn't so sure. "Eric, do you hear that?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure why I was whispering. It wasn't like the noise was going to stop if we kept quiet. He didn't even look up from the book he was reading. "It's probably just a branch or something. Don't stress." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woods had an eerie stillness to them, too still, like everything was holding its breath. The scratching continued, relentless, slow and rhythmic, almost like a warning. It felt too deliberate to be natural. My heart raced, but Eric's calm demeanor made me second-guess myself. Maybe I was just letting my imagination get the best of me. I tried to focus on the sound of his voice, the rustling of his pages. But then, something changed. The scratching, now unmistakable, came from more than one window. They were on opposite sides of the RV, and they were moving. I jumped, pulling my feet up onto the couch, staring wide-eyed at the dark windows. "Eric," I said, my voice trembling, it's moving. It's at the windows on both sides." Eric set the book down with a sigh. "Okay, enough. You're freaking out over nothing." But as he stood, I caught the unease in his eyes. He had heard it too. He moved to the door and peered out into the darkness, but all he saw were the tall, looming trees, their branches swaying gently in the wind. No sign of any animals. No other sounds but the hum of the RV's generator. "Nothing's out there," he said, though his voice wavered slightly. "You're just imagining things." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something far worse than just an animal. The noise stopped, but the air in the RV felt thick, charged, like a storm was brewing. The rest of the night was quiet, but sleep didn't come easily. My mind raced, tracing every creak and groan of the RV, wondering if they were signs of something out there, watching, waiting. Morning came, and with it, an eerie sense of calm. The forest was quiet once more, the sky a pale blue, the sun just beginning to climb above the trees. I tried to brush off the events of the night, chalking them up to the dark, the isolation, and my overactive imagination. But when we decided to explore the lost trail, something still lingered in the pit of my stomach. We left the RV behind, taking a light pack with us, determined to hike and enjoy the beauty of the wilderness. The trail was less defined than we'd expected, narrower, more rugged, with patches of brambles and thorns scratching at our legs. But it was peaceful, at least for the first few miles. That's when I began to notice the trail markers. They were odd, old, faded, almost as if someone had tried to erase them. The paint was chipped, and the numbers scratched out. At first, I figured it was just weathered. But as we ventured further, I saw that some of the markers had been deliberately altered, the arrows pointing in directions that didn't match the map I had been holding. "Eric," I said, pointing to a marker. "This one doesn't make sense. The arrow's pointing the wrong way." He shrugged, his usual dismissive attitude creeping back. "It's probably just worn down from time. Don't overthink it." But I couldn't stop thinking about it. The markers, now that I was paying attention, seemed more like warnings. We had started on the trail thinking we were on a well-worn path, but as we moved deeper into the woods, the landscape changed. The trees grew taller and denser, the underbrush thicker. The trail, which had been faint but clear, now felt like it was trying to lose us. We followed the markers, but every turn led us farther away from where we started. The trail split and then split again, and before long, I realized we were no longer following a familiar path. The forest had swallowed us whole, leaving us with nothing but twisted trees and an endless expanse of dark green. I tried to keep calm, hoping that we could just retrace our steps, but when we turned around, the forest looked different, uncharted, foreign. The trees weren't the same, the rocks had changed. Nothing matched what I remembered, nothing was where it should be. I turned to Eric, my heart pounding. "We're lost, aren't we?" He frowned, scanning the woods. "No, we're fine. Just keep going." But the panic was setting in. It wasn't the normal kind of lost. It was something worse, something that felt deliberate. The trees seemed to grow closer, their branches twisting like fingers reaching for us. The air was heavier now, thick with an unsettling tension. It wasn't just the forest, it felt as though the entire place was watching, waiting. Then, from somewhere in the distance, I heard the scratching again. It started soft, faint at first, but it was there. Scratching, like nails on glass. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was the same sound from the night before, the same deliberate rhythm, only now, it was coming from all directions. I grabbed Eric's arm, my voice shaky. "Do you hear that? It's not just in my head, is it?" He stopped, his face suddenly pale, his eyes scanning the trees. "We need to get back to the RV. Now." We turned, trying to retrace our steps, but the trail was gone. The path had disappeared completely, swallowed by the forest. We stumbled through the woods, each step more desperate than the last, but the scratching kept following us, growing louder, echoing in the trees. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A figure. Tall, thin, almost skeletal, standing motionless in the shadow of the trees. Its face was hidden, but I could feel its eyes, cold, hungry eyes, staring directly at us. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I grabbed Eric's arm again, pulling him toward the other direction, but it was no use. The trees were closing in around us, the scratching now all around, coming from all directions, too loud, too close. Suddenly, Eric was gone. One moment, he was there, and the next, he wasn't. I turned, screaming his name, but the woods swallowed it, devouring the sound as if it had never been. And then, I was alone. Alone with the scratching. Alone with the figure that now stepped forward from the shadows, its presence suffocating, as if it had always been there, waiting for me. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, but no matter how far I ran, the forest was unrelenting. And that was when I knew, I was never meant to leave. And whatever had been scratching at the windows, it had been waiting for me. I ran. I ran with every ounce of strength left in me, but the forest seemed to shift with every step, as if the trees themselves were rearranging to trap me. The scratching was louder now, not just a sound but a presence, a force that clawed at my mind and my very soul. I could feel the air growing colder, heavier, suffocating. The figure, whatever it was, had stopped moving, but its presence was more suffocating than ever. I stumbled through the woods, disoriented and terrified, but the more I struggled, the more the trail seemed to dissolve beneath my feet. Every step took me deeper into the heart of the forest, further away from the RV, further from safety. I screamed for Eric, but the words died in my throat. The trees seemed to swallow my voice, just as they had swallowed him. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I saw it, a flicker of light, faint but unmistakable. The RV. I thought I was imagining it, that my mind had finally unraveled, but no. There it was, the dim glow of the headlights casting long shadows across the clearing. I made for it, my legs shaking, my breath ragged, but as I got closer, I froze. The RV was still there, but the air around it felt wrong. The scratching, that horrible sound, was louder than ever, coming from inside the RV now. I reached for the door, but my hand froze just before it touched the handle. Through the window, I saw movement. Not Eric. No. It was something else. The shape of a figure, like the one I had seen in the woods, standing in the RV, its face obscured by shadows. The scratching was relentless, frantic now, as if the thing inside was trying to escape, desperate to get out. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, the ground beneath me feeling like it was giving way. The woods had become a labyrinth, and there was no way out. I turned around, hoping to find another path, but the trees seemed to close in around me. I was trapped. And then, I heard it. The voice, soft, distant, but unmistakable. It was Eric's voice. "Help me." I spun around, looking for him, my heart leaping in my chest. But there was no sign of him. The trees were silent again, the scratching having stopped, but the air was thick with something else now, something far worse than the fear I'd felt before. "Help me," came the voice again, this time clearer, closer. It was coming from the RV. I didn't hesitate. I ran, faster than I ever thought I could, tearing through the woods toward the RV. But when I reached it, I stopped dead in my tracks. The door to the RV was wide open. But the inside was empty. The scratching resumed. This time, it was coming from all around me. I looked up, and I saw it, the figure standing behind me, its face still hidden in the shadows, its eyes burning with a hunger that I couldn't comprehend. The sound of scratching filled my ears, but now, it wasn't just nails. It was 1,000 things, scratching, clawing, tearing, coming from everywhere, all at once. I backed away, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I couldn't move fast enough. The trees seemed to close in, the path vanishing with every step I took. And then I heard it, Eric's voice again, but this time, it was no longer a cry for help. It was a whisper, cold and empty. "You should never have come." I screamed, but my voice was lost to the woods. The figure stepped forward, its hand reaching out, and I knew, in that moment, that there was no escape. The lost trail had claimed us both. And as the darkness closed in, I realized the truth, the trail wasn't lost. It had always been waiting for us. Waiting for anyone foolish enough to wander off the map. And now, it would never let us leave. The road had been endless, stretching on and on beneath the dimming sky. My eyes felt heavy, and the hum of the tires against the asphalt was the only thing that kept me awake. The day had been long, too long, and the idea of being somewhere far from the noise of the city, with no distractions except the stars and the crackle of a campfire, was the only thing that kept my mind steady. I just needed a break. Sarah, my partner, and I had been talking about getting away for weeks. A weekend retreat, a break from the chaos. After searching for a secluded place on the map, we found a tiny campground far from the nearest town. It seemed perfect, a little patch of forest that would be our own, tucked away from the rest of the world. No crowds. No deadlines. Just the two of us, nature, and maybe a good book or two. We drove for hours, winding through the darkness until we finally found it. The campground was remote, the kind of place you'd never notice unless you were specifically looking for it. The trees stood tall and imposing around us, their shadows stretching long as night fell. The air felt crisp, untouched, like it had never been disturbed by human presence. After parking the RV, we took our time setting up, unloading the few things we needed for the night. The fire pit was an old stone circle in the middle of a small clearing, surrounded by dense forest. We made a fire, and soon, the warm glow began to fill the space around us. The flames danced and flickered, casting strange, fleeting shadows that played on the trees. It felt perfect. Sarah sat beside me, her face illuminated by the firelight, her eyes soft but tired. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for a while, we didn't say much. We were just content to be there, in that moment, alone. The crackling of the fire was the only sound. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. But that peace didn't last long. It was around midnight when I first noticed them. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, shadows moving in the corner of my vision, like the trees were swaying in ways they shouldn't be. But then I saw them more clearly, two figures standing just beyond the reach of the firelight. They were still, barely visible at first, their outlines blending with the dark forest behind them. It wasn't their movement that caught my attention. It was the fact that they were watching us. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Sarah must have sensed something because she turned her head, following my gaze. Her face went pale, and I could see her swallowing, unsure whether to acknowledge what was happening or ignore it. They didn't move. They didn't say a word. They simply stood there in the shadows, their eyes fixed on us. It was unsettling, to say the least. No greeting. No waving. Just this intense, unblinking stare. It made the hairs on my arms prickle. I tried to convince myself it was just some lost hikers, maybe even a couple of campers passing through. But they didn't look lost. They didn't look like anything familiar, either. I glanced at Sarah, trying to gauge her reaction, but she was staring straight ahead, her grip tightening on the blanket in her lap. Neither of us spoke. We just sat there, the warmth of the fire flickering between us, as if somehow it could protect us from whatever was out there. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The strangers didn't move, didn't speak. It was almost like they were waiting for us to make the next move. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they turned and disappeared back into the trees. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Maybe they're just lost," Sarah said softly, trying to shake off the unease in her voice. But I wasn't convinced. There was something about the way they just appeared, like they had been standing there for a long time, just watching, waiting. We didn't talk much after that. There was no need. The fire was still burning, but the air had shifted, a palpable unease settling over us. I kept my eyes on the woods, half expecting them to return. But nothing happened. The night resumed its normal rhythm, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves in the wind. We told ourselves it was nothing, a trick of the mind. Just a couple of strange people passing through. Eventually, we decided to head inside. It was getting late, and the quiet was starting to feel oppressive. I locked the RV door behind us, and we slid into bed, trying to shake off the tension. The air inside felt too still, like we were holding our breath. I stared up at the ceiling, the faint hum of the RV's cooling system barely audible. I thought I heard something. A rustling outside the window, but I couldn't be sure. Maybe it was just an animal, or maybe it was the wind again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Then it came. A soft, rhythmic tapping on the window. At first, I thought it was just the wind, a branch brushing against the glass. But as I lay there, listening, it came again. A steady tap, tap, tap. I shot up in bed, my heart hammering in my chest. I looked over at Sarah, who had already tensed, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't need to say anything. I could see the terror in her expression. There was someone outside. The tapping continued, echoing through the still night. It was too deliberate, too human, to be an animal. The noise seemed to surround us, moving from window to window, as if they were circling the RV. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, a raccoon maybe, or the wind playing tricks on us. But I knew it wasn't. The tapping grew louder. More insistent. I could feel the vibrations through the walls of the RV, the sound echoing in my bones. Each knock seemed to carry more weight, more urgency. And then, the whispering began. Low. Guttural. Almost indistinguishable at first, like a breeze, but unmistakable in its intent. Let us in. My heart stopped. My throat closed up. I wanted to scream, to shout, to do anything to break the silence, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't move. Sarah was clutching my arm now, her nails digging into my skin as she whispered my name, her voice trembling. Who are they?" she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't know. I didn't want to know. The tapping stopped for a moment, and the air grew colder. A heavy silence settled in the RV, thick and suffocating. But it wasn't over. No, the worst was yet to come. The whispering came again, louder this time, as if they were right outside, their breath against the glass. "Let us in, please." I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. There was no one else here. No one else was supposed to be here. The whispers grew louder, swirling around us, filling the small space with a palpable presence. The sounds were so close now, I could almost feel the breath on my skin. I slowly turned to the window, my hand trembling as I pulled the curtain back just a fraction. There they were. Standing in the dark, their faces pale and gaunt, their eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on us. They didn't move. They didn't say a word. They just stood there, waiting. Watching. I couldn't look away. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the tapping stopped. The whispers faded, and the night outside returned to silence. The stillness was so heavy, so suffocating, that it felt like the world itself had frozen. We didn't sleep that night. Not at all. We didn't dare open the door. We didn't dare move. And we never spoke of them again. But they were always there. Watching. Waiting. The next morning, we left before the sun had fully risen. There was no discussion, no debate, just an unspoken agreement between us to get out of there as quickly as possible. The RV felt like a cage, and the forest outside felt alive, breathing, waiting. The quiet of the morning only made the tension worse. Every rustling of the leaves, every snap of a twig, made my pulse race. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, far enough away to feel safe, but the dread never really left us. I tried to convince myself it had all been a bad dream, some twisted combination of exhaustion and fear, but the images of their eyes, pale, hollow, unblinking, haunted me. I couldn't escape them, even in the safety of a crowded diner. Sarah and I never spoke about it again. It felt too strange, too impossible to describe. The kind of thing that's easier to bury than to try and explain. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I'll hear the faintest tap on the window, so soft, I wonder if I imagined it. And I'll remember. The strangers by the fire never really left. They're still out there, somewhere in the dark, waiting for their next opportunity. I don't know what they want or why they were there that night, but I do know one thing for certain: we were never alone. I never should have taken the back roads. But when you've been on the road for days, the monotony of the highway starts to eat at you. I thought a detour through the quieter routes would give me some peace, a few moments to clear my head. The air in the RV felt stale as I pulled onto the old road, the kind that wasn't on any map and hadn't been paved in decades. The trees along the side hung low, their branches like hands reaching down, trying to grab the tires as I passed. I didn't think much of it. Just a quiet drive through nowhere. I thought a few hours of solitude would reset my mind. By the time the sun had set, I found a small, abandoned RV park nestled between two overgrown fields. The old, faded sign swayed in the wind, creaking as if it was protesting the idea of anyone staying here. No other vehicles. No people. It looked abandoned, but I didn't care. I needed sleep. I pulled into one of the empty spaces, locked the doors behind me, and settled into the RV for the night. The engine died with a soft sputter. I crawled into bed, pulled the covers over me, and tried to sleep. But it wasn't peaceful. The night was too still, too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses in on your ears. The kind that makes you feel like something is just outside the window, watching you. But after a while, exhaustion won out. I drifted off into an uneasy slumber. When I woke up, everything was wrong. I sat up abruptly, my head spinning. The hum of the engine still echoed through the walls of the RV, but the scenery outside had changed. There were no trees, no overgrown fields. Instead, all I could see was flat, empty land stretching out in every direction, like I was in the middle of nowhere. There were no roads, no signs of civilization, just a dull, gray horizon. My stomach tightened. I looked around, disoriented. The clock on the dashboard read 6:32 a.m., but it felt wrong. Too early. Too strange. The air was thick and heavy, like something was pressing down on the RV. I tried to shake off the unease, but it wouldn't let go. My first instinct was to check my phone, but when I reached for my pocket, it wasn't there. Panic crept up my throat. I opened the small cabinet where I kept my essentials, but my wallet was gone, too. My keys, gone, My breath quickened. My keys were always in the same place, clipped to my bag. But now, nothing. Just empty space. I stumbled toward the door, desperate. My hands were trembling as I reached for the handle. I yanked it, but it didn't open. I pushed harder, then tried pulling it, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. I was locked in. Adrenaline surged through me. I began to bang on the door, my fist hitting it over and over, my pulse pounding in my ears. My mind raced. How had I ended up here? How had the RV gotten to this strange place? And where were my keys? I froze. I heard it then. A soft, wet breath. Slow, deliberate. Like someone, asterisk asterisk or something asterisk asterisk, was trying to stay quiet. My heart thudded against my chest as I listened. The breath wasn't mine. My blood ran cold. I turned toward the sound. The RV's interior was dim, the light barely flickering as the engine hummed in the background. I strained my ears, but there was no mistaking it. Someone, or something, was in here with me. I tried to call out, but my voice wouldn't come. My throat was dry, tight with fear. The breath was closer now. Just behind me. My skin prickled as I slowly turned around. The figure was there, standing in the far corner of the RV, barely visible in the shadows. I couldn't make out any details. It was like it was, blending into the darkness, as though it didn't belong here, in this space, in this world. But its breath, ragged and steady, filled the entire RV. It was all I could hear now, its rhythm filling the air. It was watching me. I tried to back away, but my feet felt heavy, like they were glued to the floor. I stumbled, my hands grasping at anything to steady myself. The sink. The counter. The wall. Everything felt wrong. The RV, the air, the oppressive silence, and that breath, it was suffocating me. Then, the figure moved. It was so sudden, so swift, that my body reacted before my mind could catch up. I scrambled toward the kitchen, searching for anything, asterisk asterisk anything asterisk asterisk, to defend myself. A knife, a pan, anything. But as my hands searched the drawer, I noticed something strange. A smear of blood. A dark, wet stain that hadn't been there before. It was on my fingers. I stared at it, my mind struggling to comprehend what it meant. Had I been injured? Had I hurt someone? I looked down at my hands, the blood dripping down onto the floor. But then I saw it, asterisk asterisk the keys, asterisk asterisk. They were lying on the counter, glistening in the faint light. I reached for them, but as soon as my fingers touched the cold metal, the air shifted. It moved. I turned, too late. The figure was standing right in front of me now, its breath so close I could feel it against my skin. The weight of its presence crushed the air around me, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. Its face, if you could call it that, remained hidden in the darkness, but its eyes, dark, empty pits, stared straight through me. Its breath was harsh, wet, and as it exhaled, a low, guttural sound slipped from its throat, like it was about to speak. Or maybe, it was waiting. For something. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. Everything around me felt smaller, tighter. Like the RV itself was closing in. The keys. I had to get to the keys. But I couldn't take my eyes off the figure. The breathing. It grew louder, closer, desperate. I felt it in my chest. In my throat. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. The figure took a step forward, and the space between us closed. I don't remember much after that, only flashes of frantic movement, of my hands reaching for the door, the key, the air growing colder with every breath it took. When I woke up again, the engine was still running. The keys were still gone. The doors were still locked. But it was quieter now. Too quiet. And the breathing, it hadn't stopped. I tried to shake the haze from my mind, but it clung to me like thick fog. The RV was still, eerily still. I couldn't remember how long I'd been unconscious, or if I had truly passed out at all. My body ached, as though I had been running, my limbs heavy, like they were made of lead. I stumbled toward the door again, my hands shaking as I reached for the handle, but it didn't move. Locked. Of course. My eyes darted around the RV. It all felt wrong, the air was thick, the shadows too deep. I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing. No figure. Just the quiet hum of the engine and the quiet, eternal breath that echoed through the walls. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my racing thoughts. This couldn't be real. There had to be an explanation. I had to be dreaming, hallucinating, something. I gripped the keys tighter, my fingers trembling around them, but they felt off. Cold, too cold. Like they hadn't been in the RV with me at all. A sudden noise snapped me out of my stupor, a soft thud, like a door opening. But there was no door to open. No one was in here but me. I whipped my head around, eyes wide, my breath catching in my throat. The figure, it was gone. Gone. I let out a shaky breath, but it was too soon to relax. I could feel it. Something was still here. The oppressive presence lingered like a shadow in the corner of the RV, like it was watching me, waiting. I grabbed the door handle one more time, desperation clawing at me. And then I heard it again, the breathing. It was soft at first, like before, but it was coming from behind me, right beside my ear, as though it was standing right there, too close for comfort. I spun around, the blood draining from my face. Nothing. I was alone. Or was I? I stood there, frozen, the keys still clutched in my hand. Every inch of me screamed to get out, to run, to find anyone, someone who could help me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Not truly. As I stared out the window, into the vast emptiness stretching before me, I saw something. Just a flicker, a shadow moving along the horizon. But it was enough. I wasn't the only thing out here. And I couldn't remember what I had done to deserve being stuck here. The breath, the waiting, the quiet, all of it, it was just the beginning. I wasn't just trapped in the RV anymore. I was trapped in whatever nightmare this place had become. And whatever was waiting for me, it wasn't finished yet. The doors were still locked. And the keys, still gone. I should have known something was off the moment we pulled into the old gas station. The air felt wrong, thick and stagnant, as if the place had been abandoned for decades. The rusted sign that hung crookedly overhead barely caught the dim glow of the setting sun, and the pumps looked like they hadn't been used in ages. The RV, old and tired from hours on the road, rolled to a slow stop by one of the gas stations that no one else seemed to be visiting. The plan had been simple enough. A quick refuel, check the lines, maybe stretch our legs a little. We had plenty of time, no real destination, just drifting. But something about this place, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, was pulling at me, tugging at the edges of my mind in a way I didn't like. When I stepped out of the RV, I noticed the smell immediately. A faint odor at first, like something metallic, almost sour. But it wasn't just the gas, it was in the air, seeping from the earth beneath me. The kind of smell that makes your stomach twist, your skin crawl, and your instincts scream that something isn't right. I chalked it up to a strange combination of old fuel and rust, but deep down, I knew it was something worse. So we stopped. And that's when everything changed. I tried to ignore it at first. I was tired, hungry, and just wanted to get moving again. But the smell wouldn't leave me. It followed me as I stepped inside the RV and rummaged through the cabinets, searching for something to snack on. It lingered in the corners of the small space, wrapping around me, making my head spin. My partner didn't seem to notice, lost in their own world, humming softly to themselves as they flicked through their phone. I called out to them. "Hey, you smell that?" Nothing. Just the low hum of the engine and the occasional rattle of the RV as it settled into the gravel lot. I shrugged it off and opened the fridge, trying to distract myself. But then the air felt even heavier, and my unease turned to anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting. I heard it before I saw it. A soft, rhythmic tapping sound, like someone tapping against the outside of the RV, just out of reach. I froze, my hand still in the fridge, heart racing. My mind scrambled to explain it. Was it a tree branch brushing against the window? A bird hopping along the roof? I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, leaving the door slightly ajar. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves, but there was still something unnerving about the air. The tapping continued, now muffled, like it was coming from behind the RV. I moved cautiously around the side, my flashlight sweeping across the gravel. The smell was stronger now, almost suffocating, and I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Then, I saw it. The gas tank, the one we just filled, had a slight sheen to it. The metal glistened in the fading light, but something was off. It looked as if it was alive, the surface shimmering unnaturally. I stepped back, my instincts flaring. Then, as if pulled by some unseen force, I approached the tank. The metallic stench grew worse with every step. When I reached the cap, I twisted it open, the scent choking me, causing my throat to tighten. I staggered back, gagging. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the lot, standing in the distance beyond the RV, a figure was outlined against the darkening sky. It was motionless. A silhouette, impossible to make out clearly, but the air around it seemed to hum with an unsettling energy. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. "Hey!" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. "Do you need help?" But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, its shape blurring with the shadows, the edges soft and indistinct. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time, but there was still no response. A creeping coldness started to crawl up my spine. Something wasn't right. I turned back toward the RV, intending to grab my phone. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was imagining things. But the moment I took my eyes off the figure, I heard it. A thud. A soft sound, like a door creaking open. I spun around, heart pounding in my chest. The figure was closer now, standing directly behind the RV, not moving, not making a sound. It was there. Right there. A shiver ran down my spine as I called out again. "Are you okay?" I took a few steps backward, my mind screaming for me to retreat to the safety of the RV, but when I turned to reach for the door, I froze. The figure was right there. Just a few feet from the door. How had it moved so fast? How had it gotten so close without making a sound? My breath hitched in my throat as I stared at the shadowy figure. I couldn't make out its features, but I could feel it, its presence, pressing down on me like a weight, suffocating me with its silence. I couldn't move. My legs were rooted to the spot. The air was thick with the metallic stench, now overpowering, burning my nostrils. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't listen. I finally managed to tear my eyes away from the figure and reached for the door, my hand trembling. I was halfway inside when I heard it, a whisper. So faint, I thought I imagined it at first. "Help." It wasn't a voice. It was more of a feeling, a breath, something that scraped at the edges of my mind. The figure didn't speak. It didn't need to. I turned back to the door, my pulse racing, and when I looked out the window, there it was. The figure, now inches from the glass, its face a blur of shadows. There was no face. Only darkness. But I could feel its eyes, watching me. I stumbled backward, my heart racing in my chest. I tried to lock the door, but my hands were shaking too badly. My vision blurred, the smell choking me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My stomach twisted with fear, the sense that something was horribly, irrevocably wrong settling in like cold concrete. Then, just as I thought I might pass out from the overwhelming scent, the figure did something that sent my heart into a panic, its hand. Slowly, it reached out, its fingers brushing against the window. Tap. Once. Tap. Twice. The cold, hollow sound echoed through the RV, vibrating in my skull. The air was stifling, pressing in on me from all sides. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt raw, unable to form a sound. The figure just stood there, its hand on the window, unmoving. Tap. And then, as if to mock me, the door behind me creaked open. I ran. I bolted through the RV, crashing into the walls as I tried to lock myself in. But it didn't matter. The figure was already inside. It was everywhere. The smell, the shadows, the chill that now blanketed every inch of the RV. It was inescapable. And as the darkness took over, all I could hear was the tapping. The slow, steady tapping that never stopped. I don't know how long it lasted, minutes, hours, an eternity. Time seemed to stretch and twist, bending under the weight of the presence in the RV. My heart thundered in my chest, but the more I struggled to hold on to some semblance of control, the more it slipped away. Every corner of the RV felt suffocating. The air, thick with that unrelenting metallic smell, clung to my skin, filled my lungs, until I could barely breathe. The tapping never stopped. It had become a constant, haunting rhythm that seemed to resonate with my very heartbeat. Asterisk tap. Tap. Tap asterisk. I tried to turn on the lights. I tried to call for help, but the phone wouldn't work. It was like the RV had become a cage, a prison with no exit, and the air itself was closing in on me. Then the figure appeared again. I hadn't seen it move, but somehow, it was closer, right at the edge of my peripheral vision, standing just behind me. I didn't need to turn to know it was there. I could feel its presence, cold, suffocating, like it was pressing into my thoughts, burrowing into my mind. I spun around, but there was nothing. No figure, no shadow. Only the silent hum of the RV's engine, the faint creak of the floorboards beneath me. The tapping had stopped. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought it was over. My heart dared to hope. Maybe it was a nightmare. Maybe everything had been some fevered hallucination brought on by exhaustion, the smell, the isolation. But then I heard it. A voice. So faint, I almost didn't catch it. But there it was, whispering, like a breath from the darkness. Help me. The voice was not mine. It was not anyone I recognized. It was otherworldly, a voice that felt like it came from the very depths of the earth itself. And then, the worst part, the part that will haunt me forever, was the sudden realization that it wasn't just the figure I should have been afraid of. It was me. I looked down at my own hands, trembling, and noticed for the first time that they were different. My skin, pale and slick with sweat, was cracked, like the surface of dry earth. My fingers were too long, too thin, as if they no longer belonged to me. And then I understood. I wasn't trapped inside the RV anymore. I was part of it. The tapping resumed, louder now, as if the figure had found its way inside me. It was all around me, in my head, in my bones, in the very air that I breathed. It was inescapable. And just as I was about to scream, scream, the kind that would break me, the RV shook violently. The world around me blurred and twisted, the edges of everything splintering as the darkness closed in. There was no escape. No help. Just the slow, inevitable pull of the shadow. And then, nothing. I don't know how much time has passed since then. I don't know if anyone will ever find the RV. All I know is that I'm still here. Trapped. The tapping never stops. It's inside me now. And I'm not sure how much longer I can pretend to be human. I should have known better. It was late, the kind of late where the world feels abandoned, silent and suffocating, with only the sound of the tires humming against the road. I was miles away from the nearest town, just me and the dark expanse of highway stretching out in front of me. The headlights cut through the blackness, illuminating nothing but empty asphalt. The trip had been long, and the only thing keeping me company was the radio static, flickering in and out with each passing mile. That's when I saw them, standing there on the shoulder of the road, their thumb outstretched. A hitchhiker. It seemed harmless enough. Maybe they were stranded. It's a lonely stretch of highway, after all. I'm no hero, but I couldn't just leave someone out there in the cold night. So, I slowed down and pulled over. They climbed in without a word, their eyes never meeting mine. At first, I didn't think much of it. Hitchhikers are just people looking for a ride, right? What could go wrong? Thanks, they muttered softly, their voice muffled by the wind. I didn't know what to make of it. Their voice didn't sound quite right, too quiet, too flat. But I chalked it up to tiredness. We all sound off when we're exhausted, don't we? They sat there, hands folded in their lap, staring out the window. Their clothes were ragged, worn jeans, a tattered jacket, and boots caked with dirt. But it was the smile that unsettled me. It wasn't wide, but it wasn't quite right either. It curled just enough at the corners of their lips, as if they were amused by something that I couldn't see. It didn't make sense. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to start a conversation. The silence between us felt heavy, oppressive, and I wanted to break it. They didn't respond at first, just kept staring out the window, the smile still there. For a long, unnerving moment, I thought they hadn't heard me. Then, in a voice so soft I almost didn't catch it, they said, "Wherever you're going is fine." I didn't know what to make of that. It didn't sound like the typical answer. Most hitchhikers are eager to tell you where they're headed, but this one was different. For a while, I just focused on the road. The headlights illuminated the blacktop ahead, stretching into nothing. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the world around us felt suffocating, as if it was holding its breath. I glanced over at the hitchhiker. They hadn't moved a muscle, just staring blankly ahead, a strange stillness to them. Something about the way their posture was too perfect, too rigid, set my nerves on edge. They didn't even blink. I shook it off. It was probably just exhaustion. Being on the road for too long can play tricks on your mind. But then, as I shifted my gaze back to the road, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The headlights were no longer illuminating the usual stretch of road. The landscape had changed. I blinked. It had to be a trick of the light, right? But no. The road ahead was suddenly empty, as if it was stretching into a never-ending void. There were no signs, no markers, nothing to tell me where I was or how far I had gone. The world outside was an abyss, a black hole of silence. I glanced over at the hitchhiker again. They were still sitting there, but their smile had grown wider. The corners of their lips twitched, pulling the skin tight across their face in a way that shouldn't have been possible. It was a grotesque stretch of a smile, one that didn't belong on a human face. "What's going on?" I muttered to myself, more to break the tension than anything else. The hitchhiker turned to face me then, slowly, deliberately. Their eyes locked with mine, cold, calculating, predatory. "You should have kept driving," they whispered. I froze. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I felt the words settle into the pit of my stomach like stones. "What?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my best effort to stay calm. "You should have kept driving," they repeated, this time louder, more insistent. "You shouldn't have stopped." I could feel my pulse quicken, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I wasn't sure if it was fear or something else entirely, something deeper, more primal, that told me I had made a terrible mistake. I didn't know what they meant. I didn't understand. I turned back to the road, trying to shake the creeping dread that was swallowing me whole. But that's when I realized something terrifying. The road ahead was no longer a road. The asphalt had faded into something otherworldly. It was dark, an endless void with no horizon, no end. I couldn't see the line between the pavement and the sky. The car was still moving, but it felt like it was floating, like it wasn't even touching the ground anymore. My breath caught in my throat. "What's happening?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You shouldn't have stopped," the hitchhiker repeated, their voice now dripping with an eerie satisfaction. "Now you're with me." I could feel the weight of their words settle over me, crushing the air from my lungs. I didn't know what to do. My foot pressed harder on the gas, but the car didn't speed up. The void around us stretched on, an endless abyss that swallowed everything. And then it hit me. The realization came in a sickening wave. There were no other cars. No lights. No signs. No other people. The world had vanished, leaving only me and this thing beside me. I whipped my head to the side again, only to find the hitchhiker's face twisted into something unrecognizable. Their mouth had stretched wide, far too wide, splitting open like a grotesque grin. The skin around their eyes was pulled tight, revealing teeth that were sharp, too sharp, like a predator's. I slammed on the brakes, but nothing happened. The car didn't slow down. The darkness pressed in on all sides, the car feeling smaller, suffocating. Why didn't I keep driving? I gasped, my chest tightening. The hitchhiker leaned forward, their smile spreading, impossibly wide. "Because now, you're mine." That's when the car jerked violently, and the headlights flickered out. Everything went black. I don't know how long it's been since that moment, the moment when the world disappeared, when the road I thought I knew was swallowed up by that void. I've been trapped here, in this endless stretch of nothing, with the hitchhiker. I'm not sure if I'm even still in the car. Sometimes, I feel like I am, my hands still gripping the wheel, my body stiff from sitting in place for what feels like days, maybe weeks. Other times, I wonder if I've been here forever, suspended between time, between worlds. The hitchhiker sits beside me, their eyes never leaving mine, that grotesque smile still pulling at their face. They don't need to speak anymore. The air between us is thick with unspoken understanding. I can feel their presence pressing on me, suffocating me with every second that passes. They've claimed me. They've dragged me into this place where roads don't end, where nothing exists but the dark, endless stretch ahead. There's no escape. The void has consumed everything, and I am nothing more than another lost soul, another victim of the night. Sometimes, I think I hear the distant sound of a car, a rumble, a flicker of headlights, someone else passing through. I want to scream, to shout out for help, but I know it's pointless. The hitchhiker just smiles, as if they've already heard me, already seen the terror in my eyes. You shouldn't have stopped, they whisper again, their voice like a cruel lullaby. Now you're with me. And I realize, with a sickening certainty, that they're right. There is no road back. There is no escape from this endless night. I don't know if I'm dead. I don't know if I'm alive. All I know is that I am trapped. And that smile, the one that never fades, will be my only companion for eternity. I've always loved the open road, the endless horizons, the sense of freedom. That's why I bought the RV, packed up, and decided to drive to the campsite I'd been dreaming about. Just me, the road, and the promise of a peaceful retreat from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. I had no idea that this trip, this simple getaway, would turn into a nightmare. It started off innocently enough. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the empty highway. I was in a new area, miles from civilization, and the GPS was my guide. The campsite wasn't too far now, or so it seemed. I felt safe, comfortable. There was nothing to worry about. But then, the screen on my GPS flickered. It wasn't a random glitch, I could tell. It was more like the device was struggling, as though something was trying to keep me from getting where I was going. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just a technical hiccup. I pulled over to the side of the road, intending to reset it. The air had grown colder as dusk settled in. A thin fog crept up from the trees that lined the highway, curling around the tires of my RV. The silence outside was unnerving. I glanced out the window, seeing nothing but the thickening shadows between the trees. My headlights barely penetrated the mist. I fiddled with the GPS, trying to restart it. As I pressed the buttons, the screen went black. Then, to my surprise, a faint whisper drifted through the open window. Asterisk asterisk come here, asterisk asterisk. I froze, my blood running cold. I strained my ears, convinced it had to be the wind playing tricks on me, or maybe some animal making an odd sound in the woods. But then, I heard it again, clearer this time, like someone was standing right outside, just out of sight. The voice, it sounded so familiar. Like it was my name, but twisted, hollowed out, like it was calling me from a deep, forgotten place. Asterisk asterisk come here, please, asterisk asterisk. I didn't know why, but I felt an inexplicable compulsion to look out the window. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the trees, expecting to see someone, anyone, there. But there was nothing. Nothing but the swirling fog and the shifting branches in the breeze. I stepped out of the RV, my legs trembling as I slowly made my way to the edge of the road. My eyes darted around the darkened woods, but there was no movement, no sign of life. The voice had stopped. I told myself I was imagining things. I had to be. There was no one out here. The road had been deserted for miles. Maybe it was just the isolation playing tricks on my mind. I tried to steady my breath, to calm myself, but the air felt heavier now, thick with an unsettling presence. I climbed back into the RV, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the door. The interior was just as I left it, warm and still. The GPS had powered back on, but now the route had changed. The screen showed a new path, one I didn't recognize. I squinted at the glowing map, confused. There was no campsite, no familiar landmarks. The new route led me down a winding path, a narrow road through the trees that twisted away from the highway. A feeling of unease gripped me. I didn't want to follow the new route, it didn't feel right. But then the voice came again, not through the air, but in my mind. Asterisk asterisk, it's waiting for you, asterisk asterisk. I froze, my hands gripped tightly on the wheel. It was impossible to ignore now. This wasn't just a glitch. It felt as though something wanted me to follow this road. A shiver ran through my spine, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around. It was like I was being drawn to it, compelled to drive down that twisting path. I pushed the gas pedal, and the RV lurched forward, following the new route. The fog thickened, swirling around the vehicle like a living thing, and the trees pressed in closer, their skeletal branches reaching toward me like skeletal hands. The headlights barely pierced the growing darkness, and every inch of the road ahead seemed to stretch into infinity. The GPS kept recalculating the route as I drove, but there was no sign of another exit, no sign of a way out. The road seemed endless. My eyes darted nervously from the screen to the windshield. I kept expecting to see a sign of civilization, a distant light, something to tell me I wasn't alone. But there was nothing. No other vehicles, no houses, no signs of life. Just me, the RV, and the unrelenting dark. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The air was heavy, thick with a sense of danger that I couldn't explain. The trees crowded the road, their gnarled branches clawing at the edges of the RV. The fog swirled tighter, the world outside feeling suffocating. I should have stopped, turned around, but the GPS screen kept flashing new directions, urging me onward, down that road that seemed to lead into nowhere. And then I saw it, a break in the trees ahead. I thought it was an opening, a clearing, maybe a way out. But when I reached it, my heart sank. The road ended abruptly. There was no turning back. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching as I skidded to a halt at the edge of the dead end. The RV's engine sputtered, then fell silent. I stared ahead, my stomach sinking. There was no way forward. No way out. I threw the gear shift into reverse, but the RV didn't move. The engine roared to life, but the tires stayed stuck in place. I tried again, slamming my foot down, but it was as if the earth itself was holding me there. The trees around me seemed to close in, their branches pressing against the sides of the RV as if they were trying to trap me in. I looked at the GPS again. The screen was still on, but the map was now wrong. The road I had come from had vanished, replaced by an impassable wall of trees. The route had changed, again. There was no exit. No way back. The voice came once more, clearer now, more insistent. Asterisk asterisk, you shouldn't have come, asterisk asterisk. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. The temperature inside the RV had plummeted, and the air felt thick with a presence I couldn't see but could feel all around me. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrambled for the door, trying to escape, but the handle wouldn't turn. The windows fogged up as my breath came in sharp, panicked gasps. I looked outside, there was no moonlight, no stars. Only the dark, the oppressive, suffocating dark. And then, in the distance, I saw something. A figure, just beyond the edge of the trees. It was impossible to tell if it was human. It stood still, watching. Watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. I don't know how much time passed after that. It felt like hours, or maybe only minutes. Time seemed to bend here, in this place. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, but there was no use. The road was gone. The GPS was useless. And I was trapped, alone in the dark, with something out there waiting for me. I can still hear the voice, calling from the trees. Asterisk asterisk come here, asterisk asterisk. I don't know how long I sat there, in that lifeless void, the silence pressing in around me. Every nerve in my body screamed to leave, to get out of that place, but the road, the trees, the voice, everything conspired to keep me there. I kept telling myself that I had to be imagining it, that I had to be caught in some bizarre glitch, a twisted malfunction of technology and the mind. But deep down, I knew the truth. The figure had been real. Something was watching me. And it was waiting. Panic gripped me as I finally forced the door open, stepping out into the cold night air, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I tried to move, tried to make sense of what was happening, but it felt as though the world around me was suffocating. The fog wrapped itself tighter around me, the trees pressing in closer. I glanced back at the RV, still motionless, silent, like it had become part of the landscape, another dead thing in the forest. I heard it then, the crunch of footsteps on the dry leaves behind me. Slow, deliberate, each step echoing louder in the silence. I didn't dare turn around. I didn't have to. I knew. I felt the presence drawing nearer. I ran. My heart pounded in my chest, my legs burning with the effort. The trees seemed to close in even more, their twisted branches reaching for me, as though they were trying to pull me back into their dark embrace. But I kept running, ignoring the pain, ignoring the growing certainty that I wasn't going to make it out of this place. Then, just as quickly as it had started, I broke through the trees. The fog lifted, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I saw the open road ahead. It wasn't the same road I'd been traveling on, it was different, untouched, like the road I'd been on had been erased entirely. I didn't stop to question it. I didn't care. I ran toward the distant lights of what seemed like a town, small, but real. People. Safety. I finally stumbled into the town hours later, half collapsed from exhaustion and fear. But even as I told my story, even as I begged someone to believe me, I could see the disbelief in their eyes. They didn't know what I had seen, what I had felt. I didn't blame them. I wouldn't have believed it either, if I hadn't experienced it myself. I never went back to that road, to that place where the trees had seemed alive, where the voice still echoed in my head. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I hear it again. That whisper, just on the edge of my mind, faint but undeniable. Asterisk asterisk come here, asterisk asterisk. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it called me. But I do know this, there are places out there, hidden deep in the world, where the roads don't lead where you think they do. Where the GPS malfunctions on purpose. Where something waits for those who venture too close. And I can't shake the feeling that one day, it will come for me again. We had always talked about getting away from the grind of everyday life, no phones, no emails, just the open road and the company of good friends. That's how we ended up in a remote area, nestled near a national forest, our trusty RV parked in a clearing surrounded by towering trees. It was supposed to be the perfect escape, a weekend to disconnect and recharge. But we didn't know that we were about to stumble upon something that would haunt us far beyond the trip. The day was warm when we arrived, the sun shining through the thick canopy of leaves above us, dappling the ground in patches of gold and green. We set up camp without a care in the world, stowing away food, cracking open beers, and settling into lawn chairs. The woods around us were quiet, peaceful even. It felt like we had the entire world to ourselves. We should hike tomorrow, Aaron said, glancing out toward the thick forest that stretched endlessly in all directions. Maybe find a good spot for a photo op. Sure, Jenny replied, stretching her arms above her head. But for now, I'm just enjoying the quiet. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a soft chill crept into the air. We made a fire and sat around it, drinking, joking, and telling stories. The flickering flames cast eerie shadows against the trees, and the smoke curled upward, dissolving into the night. It was peaceful in that way you can only get when you're far from the noise of civilization. But as the sky deepened into ink, a strange sense of unease settled over me. The sounds of the forest began to change, no longer just the distant chirps of crickets and the occasional rustling of leaves, but something else. Something heavier, deeper. It started faintly at first, a twig snapping in the distance, like an animal moving through the underbrush. But then it was closer. Too close. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The others didn't seem to notice, too engrossed in their conversation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, moving in the dark. "It's probably a deer," Aaron said, laughing it off. But the laugh didn't reach his eyes. I stood up and wandered a little ways from the fire, trying to shake the unease that had settled in my chest. The night was pitch black now, the only light coming from the flickering flames and the stars above. I stood still for a moment, straining to hear the sounds that seemed to be growing closer. There was no wind, no breeze, nothing to explain the rustling that echoed through the trees. Then, I heard it again. A deep, low growl, almost like the rumble of thunder but too close. My stomach dropped. I froze. I glanced toward the others. They were still talking, completely unaware. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it was just an animal. A bear, maybe. Or a wolf. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I turned back toward the RV, but before I could take a step, a flash of movement caught my eye. Something large, dark, and too quick to identify darted between the trees, just at the edge of the firelight. My heart hammered in my chest. It was too big to be a deer. I walked back to the campfire, trying to act normal, though the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. "Hey, we should head inside soon. This place feels off," I said, my voice a little more shaken than I intended. Jenny looked up at me, brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "It's just a forest. Let's have fun while we're here." She smiled, though there was a nervous edge to it. I didn't want to press it further, but I could feel the tension in the air. We all sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Then came another noise, closer this time. The unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps, deliberately slow and measured, like something was walking toward us. My eyes darted toward the trees, trying to catch sight of whatever it was. Nothing. Just shadows. "I'm going to check outside," I said, unable to sit still any longer. "Something's not right." The others barely protested as I slipped outside the RV, my pulse quickening with each step. The air outside was still, too still, and it seemed to press down on me, heavy with something unspoken. I looked around, my eyes scanning the dark edges of the clearing. The only thing that seemed to move was the occasional breeze shifting the branches above me. Then I saw them. Tire tracks. Fresh. They cut through the dirt in wide, tight circles, the rubber still dark and soft. They surrounded the RV, tracing the perimeter as though something had been pacing around us for hours. My breath caught in my throat. I crouched down to get a better look. The tracks were too perfect, too deliberate. Whoever had been here, had been circling. I stood up quickly, my mind racing. We hadn't heard a single vehicle. The road was too narrow for anything to get in or out without us noticing. Suddenly, a cold wind rustled through the trees, and I felt something behind me, a presence that wasn't there a second ago. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing. Nothing except the woods, dark and oppressive, closing in. I didn't wait to look any longer. I rushed back inside the RV, my pulse thundering in my ears. My friends were sitting exactly where I'd left them, laughing, unaware of what I had found. I didn't even know how to explain it. How could I? How could I tell them we were being watched without sounding insane? "Guys," I said, my voice shaking. "We need to leave. Now." Aaron gave me a puzzled look. "What?" "It's just some noise. You're freaked out over nothing." But I wasn't wrong. I knew what I saw. What I heard. "Just trust me," I said, my voice low but firm. "We're not alone out here." I grabbed my bag and started toward the door, but before I could make it out, something caught my eye. A figure, tall, too tall to be human, shifted between the trees, its long, spindly limbs moving in ways that were utterly unnatural. The shadows twisted around it, making it look like part of the forest itself, something that shouldn't exist. It was watching us. The door slammed shut behind me before I could scream. My friends turned to look, but by then, I had already seen enough. "Start the engine," I urged Aaron, my voice trembling. "Start the engine, now." He didn't argue. We all piled into the RV, slamming the doors shut as the engine roared to life. The tires screeched as we sped down the narrow dirt road, the forest a blur of black and green on either side. The strange feeling didn't leave, though. Even as we drove farther away, I felt as though something was following us, always just out of sight, just behind the trees. Something that wasn't ready to let go. By the time we reached the main road, the silence of the woods had followed us. It pressed in on me, suffocating in cold. We didn't talk about it, none of us did. The drive back to the city was quiet, with only the hum of the RV's engine filling the air. But we all knew. We had been watched. And whatever it was that had been circling us in the woods, it wasn't done with us. None of us ever spoke of that night again. But we never returned to that forest either. We knew better. Something had been out there. Something had been waiting. And the worst part? It still was. The days passed, but the feeling never really left. We went back to our lives, pretending that the events in the woods were just a bad dream, something we could laugh about, even though none of us ever spoke of it again. But the weight of it lingered, pressing down on us in quiet moments, in the stillness before sleep. I would catch myself glancing over my shoulder when walking through wooded areas, feeling a sudden chill run through me when the wind shifted in just the right way. The forest had become something darker, something that would forever haunt me. Months later, after everything had settled into a routine, I tried to dismiss the memory as a product of too much fear and too little sleep. But one evening, I came across something that changed all of that. I was going through old photos on my phone, scrolling absent-mindedly when one image caught my eye. It was a picture of the RV, taken the morning after our first night in the woods. The sun was still low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground, and everyone was still half asleep, standing outside the RV, stretching and packing up. But behind us, clear as day, was a shape, tall, impossibly tall, barely visible in the distance, standing at the edge of the trees. The outline of something humanoid, but with limbs that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. I froze. My pulse quickened as I zoomed in on the image, heart hammering in my chest. It was unmistakable. That thing had been there, watching us, even when we hadn't known. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't. The chilling thought kept creeping into my mind, that thing had been following us long before we even noticed. And as much as I wanted to forget, to move on, I knew deep down that it wasn't over. The forest doesn't forget. And neither does whatever was out there. The worst part? I'm not sure if I ever left.